On the outer edge of the bridge, a girl stood, her hands clenched around the icy metal bars. As Thomas drove past, he spotted her and, with an open car window, urgently called out, trying to prevent her from taking a hasty step. The girl remained unresponsive. Without hesitation, Thomas slammed on the brakes, leapt out of his car, and cautiously approached her. Engaging her in conversation, he introduced himself, all the while persuading her to reconsider her actions. He advanced slowly, aiming not to startle her away. The girl appeared resolute, her gaze fixed downward, and she cautioned Thomas against drawing nearer, as she had already made up her mind. Impervious to any change, a frigid December wind howled, snowflakes descended, and the weather on the bridge grew even more forbidding. Noticing her bare hands struggling to clutch them frost-covered railing, Thomas quickened his pace. Desperate to prevent her from taking a fateful plunge, he babbled nonsensically. "Do you have a preference for ice cream?" he inquired. "It doesn't matter anymore," she replied softly, her gaze unmoving. Thomas, drawing nearer to her, maintained a hushed tone to avoid startling her. Closing the final distance with a few swift steps, he encircled her, forcing her away from the bridge's edge with all his might. They both tumbled to the sidewalk, where Thomas held her tightly, whispering reassurances. It's okay," he comforted her, his fingers gently stroking her head. The girl, trembling from the cold in her flimsy jacket, shed tears. She tried to speak, but sobs choked her words. A concerned passerby rushed over, but Thomas signaled that they were fine and didn't require assistance. The bystander understood the situation, having witnessed a similar incident on this bridge before, though the outcome had been tragic. He praised Thomas's quick response and returned to his vehicle. The gathering onlookers gradually dispersed, leaving Thomas and the unknown girl on the bridge. She remained silent, offering only her name, Olive. Thomas brushed the snow from her clothes and led her to his car. Helping her into the passenger seat, he secured her with a seatbelt and cranked up the heater. "You'll warm up quickly now. Do you have somewhere to go?" Thomas asked. "No, I have nowhere to go," Olive replied calmly. "Very well, then let's head to my place for the time being," Thomas said with a warm smile as they drove away. They reached their destination swiftly. After parking, Thomas assisted Olive out of the car. Still in shock, the girl struggled to comprehend the unfolding situation. As Thomas opened the door to his apartment, his wife greeted them at the threshold. Mile was taken aback to find her husband not alone. She began to inquire, and Thomas briefly explained how he had prevented the young girl from jumping off the bridge just in time. He asked Mile to help the frozen girl take a bath, and then left the bathroom. Mile assisted Olive in removing her sweater and getting into the warm bath, all the while trying to learn more about her. She inquired about Olive's age and learned that the girl was only 18. Mile attempted to understand the reasons behind Olive's desperate act, but Thomas interrupted, suggesting they refrain from probing questions until Olive had calmed down. In the kitchen, Thomas sat down to eat a sandwich his wife had prepared. Mile was eager to gather more details about what had transpired, but Thomas only recounted what he knew. He had been on his way home from a client's place when he noticed the girl about to jump off the bridge and decided to intervene. Mile heaved a tired sigh. All evening, she had anxiously waited for her husband to return from work, calling him repeatedly, and she couldn't fathom why he had been delayed. Thomas hugged his wife and explained that he simply couldn't ignore the girl who had nowhere else to turn. Millie looked at him, smiled, and went to find some clothes for Olive. Meanwhile, Thomas searched the shelves for honey, retrieved milk from the fridge, and prepared a hot remedy for the cold according to his grandmother's recipe. Millie had prepared a bed for Olive in their son Arthur's room, as they had decided to move Arthur into their bedroom temporarily. She entered the bathroom with clean clothes and saw Olive lying with her eyes closed. When she touched the girl's shoulder, Olive jolted in fear, making Miley realize that something deeply troubling had happened to her. Millie handed Olive a warm tracksuit and informed her that they were waiting for her in the kitchen. When Olive joined them, Thomas offered her a cup of hot milk with honey, which she sipped without enthusiasm. Olive declined dinner, so Thomas escorted her to the nursery, assuring her not to hesitate to ask for anything they could provide. The next morning, Olive awoke to the sensation of someone gently stroking her hair. Opening her eyes, she saw a 4-year-old boy sitting in front of her. He peppered her with innocent questions about who she was, why she was there, whether she'd always sleep in his room, and if she wanted to play with him. Olive sat up on the bed and smiled apologetically, explaining to the boy that she was sorry for taking his room and that she would be leaving soon. Arthur brought a large plastic truck to the bed, trying to involve her in a game, and Olive did her best to play along. When Thomas and Millie peeked into the room to check on Olive, they found her sitting on the bed, tears streaming as she looked at the toy car. Olive looked up and apologized for the trouble she had caused. Millie decided to lighten the mood and brought Olive into the kitchen for breakfast. During the meal, Thomas and Millie steered the conversation away from the events of the previous day and the reasons that had driven Olive to such desperation. However, no matter the topic of their conversation, whether it was about the weather or the New Year's Eve traffic, there would be intermittent, weighty silences. Olive nibbled at her food, clearly lost it. Distant thoughts, impervious to the attempts of those around her to draw her away from her melancholic reverie. It was New Year's Eve, and while Thomas shifted his focus to his son, who had seized his father's dumbbell, Miley inquired about his plans for the day. My colleagues mentioned that there are plenty of orders today, considering it's New Year's Eve, so I'll go and work a bit, he replied. After finishing his tea, he paused for a moment, and then a brilliant idea struck him. With determination, Thomas declared that today Olive would accompany him and lend a helping hand. Before she could object, he gave her a mere 5 minutes to get ready and left the kitchen. Olive quickly prepared herself, and they hopped into the car, driving off. Thomas was curious about the reasons behind her desperate act, but decided not to press her. If she wanted to share, she would. Instead, he turned on the radio to lighten the atmosphere. Thomas worked as a part-time courier, and today, having received their first order, they hurried to the initial delivery address. Olive stared ahead, her mind swirling with countless thoughts, most notably why he had saved her. Thomas parked the car, stepped out, and returned about 5 minutes later with a small envelope from a man in a sharp business suit. He handed the envelope to Olive, humorously dubbing her the guardian of parcels for the day. He also decided to involve her in a game he often played during his long days of delivering letters and packages throughout the city. The game involved trying to guess the recipient and the sender of the letters and parcels they delivered. While they didn't always get it right, the process greatly amused Thomas. En route to the store, they made a pit stop, where Thomas purchased a Santa Claus hat for himself and a pixie hat for Olive. As she put it on and looked in the mirror, a faint smile miled her lips for the first time. Thomas beamed with satisfaction at the result and steered them toward them. First delivery destination. Thomas bet a tangerine with Olive that the envelope was meant for the sender's mistress, and he asked for her opinion. Olive responded, sadly, that she had no choice but to assume it was for the sender's wife. With a mischievous glint, Thomas calmly remarked as he exited the car that there was always a choice. An elderly woman, eagerly anticipating this envelope, emerged from her home to greet them. She joyfully explained that it was time for her and her husband to embark on a trip, and her son had purchased their tickets but inadvertently left them at his place. Thomas handed the envelope to the woman, extending his New Year's greetings, and they returned to the car, realizing that they had both failed to guess the contents. He quickly picked up a new order, and they sped off to their next destination. At the subsequent address, a kind lady with a leg cast welcomed them at the door. She began displaying the neatly wrapped presents for her granddaughters, daughter, and son-in-law. These boxes are for the girls. This one is for my son-in-law, and this package is for my daughter, she explained. Please be especially careful with this one. It contains mittens made of mink, and I wouldn't want them to get wrinkled, she added. I hope you won't find it impolite, but my daughter left behind a package of clothes she no longer needs at my home. I believe it might be suitable for your daughter. I know for a fact that there are many brand new, expensive clothes in there because my daughter is quite a fashionista. I just need your assistance in bringing it here. Their client's house resembled a palace, adorned with paintings, candelabra lamps on the walls, Italian tiles on the floor, and a beautifully decorated fireplace in the hall. Thomas carried a sizable bag of gifts and handed Olive a bag of presents, taking the weighty bag filled with clothes himself. They bid their farewells and set off to deliver the gifts. Their recipients lived a few streets away. The daughter and son-in-law greeted them with indifferent expressions. Thomas informed them that they had brought presents from their caring grandmother and handed over toy packages to the girls who came out. The two 6-year-old twins swiftly tore through the wrapping paper, but were disappointed to find dolls they already owned. They threw the dolls on the ground and ran into the house, crying. The father of the family accepted his gift apathetically, placed it on the hallway dresser, and departed without a word. As for the mittens, the woman rolled her eyes in annoyance, stating she had no use for them, clearly frustrated that her mother had purchased the wrong dolls once. Again, she begrudgingly accepted the gifts. Thomas and Olive hastily bid their farewells and made their way back to the car. Olive felt a pang of sadness, understanding that the elderly woman had taken great care in choosing these gifts, and the expensive presents had been discarded like trash. It weighed heavily on her mind. Yes, Olive, sometimes that's how it goes, Thomas expressed his disappointment. But we need to keep moving. At the next address, a woman handed them a massive cake box, expressing her concern about its safety during the delivery. After reassuring her that it would arrive in perfect condition, Thomas handed the cake to Olive, who sat in the car. The cake was so enormous that it almost concealed her entirely. Thomas contemplated who this gigantic cake could be for, as they weren't aware of the recipient's identity. Additionally, they were instructed not to reveal the sender. When they arrived at their destination, Olive helped carry the cake, and Thomas rang the doorbell. The sounds of children's laughter and excitement emanated from behind the door, leading Thomas to deduce that the cake was destined for a birthday celebration. A woman greeted them with a warm smile, and behind her peered 6 children of varying ages. It turned out to be the twins' birthday, and they were celebrating it with their family. Thomas presented them with the birthday cake, leaving the woman puzzled about the sender's identity. She assumed her husband had ordered it and inquired about the cost, but Thomas cheerfully declared it was a gift. As they were about to leave, the woman asked them to wait and hurried to the kitchen. She returned bearing homemade gingerbread cookies, evident that they were crafted with love by the entire family, with children's decorations adorning the treats. Thomas accepted the package of treats with care, and to everyone's surprise, Olive excused herself, expressing her desire to contribute to this large and loving family. She suggested that the older girls might find something in the bag of goodies to their liking. Thomas looked at Olive with astonishment but eventually nodded. Olive requested the keys and dashed down to the car top, retrieved the bag belonging to the elderly woman. In the interim, Thomas engaged in conversation with the woman and her children. Olive returned breathlessly, hauling a substantial package into the apartment. "Here, happy birthday and happy new year," she exhaled. "Best wishes to you, and thank you for that gingerbread," added Thomas, and they departed, leaving Olive with a bright smile on her face. Thomas couldn't conceal his surprise and was genuinely pleased by Olive's thoughtful gesture. She could have kept those items for herself, but she felt that this family was in greater need. Thomas decided to take this moment to inquire about Olive's situation. He had noticed she hadn't used her phone, but her expression suddenly grew serious as she explained that her mother was away on a business trip, and she preferred not to hear from anyone, so she had turned off her phone. When he asked when her mother would return, she reassured him that she could go to her grandmother's village today since she wasn't going back home. Anyway, understanding that he had touched on a sensitive topic, Thomas suggested they go out for ice cream and then shop together for the items on Miley's list. They headed to the mall and left an hour and a half later, having purchased all the necessary items for the upcoming celebration. Thomas proposed that Olive join them for the New Year's and then go to her grandmother's house. Initially hesitant, Olive's doubts were put to rest by Thomas, who assured her that they weren't expecting any other guests and that she would have a great time with them. Additionally, he discovered that Olive didn't have money for the ticket to her grandmother's, so he handed her some cash, explaining it was her earnings for the day. Olive felt a bit awkward but smiled and agreed. In the evening, Miley lent Olive one of her evening dresses, and both she and Thomas dressed up for the occasion. Altogether, the apartment's residents resembled one big, united family. Arthur raced excitedly around the Christmas tree, eagerly urging Santa to arrive while he was still awake. Olive had become noticeably more talkative and joined in the merriment, sharing laughter with Arthur. Yet, neither Miley nor Thomas could fathom why the girl had found herself on that bridge, on the brink of ending her life. In those days, they learned very little about Olive's past. But Olive, on the other hand, had gleaned a great deal about her newfound family. She had come to understand that kindness wasn't just about presents. It was rooted in love, care, and mutual respect. A family was more than just parental orders and instructions. It was about truly listening to one another. Before the clock's chimes heralded the new year, Olive took a photo with Thomas's family to capture the moment when she felt like a genuine part of the family, filled with happiness. Before her departure, Olive bought small souvenirs for all the family members, and in return, Thomas and Miley presented her with a warm scarf, hat, and mittens. "May I stay in touch?" Olive asked, shyly. "I promise not to call too often and not to bother you. I just want to feel that you're always close by." Thomas, Miley, and Arthur assured her warmly that she was more than welcome to stay in contact. Mealy playfully tied Olive's scarf around her neck and gave her a hug. Just promise us that those calls won't be from a bridge, she added. Mealy, Thomas interjected with a gentle reproach. That's a bit too much. Olive responded with a reassuring smile. Don't worry. I promise you that. Thank you for everything. She hurriedly got into a waiting taxi. A year later, the family received a photo from Olive, depicting her wearing the fluffy hat, scarf, and mittens they had given her, standing among trees covered in the same fluffy snow. In her hands, she held a sign that read, "Thank you for the new life." Thomas and Mealy proudly placed the photo on a shelf next to pictures of Arthur and playfully told inquirers that they had another daughter. Only they truly comprehended the message of the smiling young girl.